Thank you so much for coming. Good afternoon, good evening. I really appreciate that everyone is here. There's lots of familiar names, so I'm actually very touched that you're zooming in from different time zones as well to be here for the opening. And of course, it's my great pleasure to walk you through this 3D model that we have of Beyond Metaphor, Women and War. And Abby has mentioned that this exhibition idea came through the apexart open call. And I just want to stress how unique this model really is, because it offers a very democratic selection process. So if there's people in the audience who have an intriguing exhibition idea, then I would definitely encourage you to submit it during the next open call, because it has been a wonderful experience. And the production of any exhibition is always, a collaborative effort. It's never the work of one individual. And I have received so much, trust and support from the apexart team, particularly at the time of the pandemic, where, I wasn't even able to fly over to New York to assist in the installation of the show. So we have done this all through FaceTime, and I really appreciate all the support I got. So perhaps we can move into the exhibition itself now, Lisa, if that's possible. Perfect. So Beyond Metaphor, Women and War is a group exhibition that features the work of 5 really fantastic artists: Marwa Arsanios, Kader Attia, Katia Kameli, Nadia Makhlouf, and Zineb Sedira. And I have been following their work and have been inspired by their work for a long time now. And in fact, the entire exhibition idea emerged in very close dialogue with the work of these artists that, as you will see, includes photography, video, animation, and artist books. And for a while now, I have been thinking about putting their works in conversation with one another to see what distinct conceptual and aesthetic ideas and strategies have been adopted by each artist to explore histories of women during the Algerian War of Independence. So I would just like to take the moment to publicly offer thanks to all artists. I know that Nadia Makhlouf is with us today. And I would also want to draw attention to the fact that all of the videos that we're showing in this exhibition can be also viewed online on the apexart website. So in case you're not able to visit the actual physical exhibition in New York, then I do warmly invite you to watch the videos, at least online. As I have mentioned and Abby has mentioned, the exhibition showcases the work of artists who explore the experiences of women during the Algerian War of Independence. And just to give you a brief sort of historical overview for those who might not be familiar with this conflict, the War of Independence in Algeria was fought between 1954 and 1962, and it ended the very long French colonial rule. Because the French conquered Algeria in 1830 and would remain there for over 130 years, even though European settlers constituted as little as 10% of the entire population. What is also little known is that Algeria formed an integral part of France, rather than just being an overseas colony. And this distinguished it from other territories that were under French colonial rule. And school children, for instance, in mainland France would learn that similarly, as Paris, the capital was or is still divided by the river Seine into the left and right riverbank, so too would France. France was divided by the Mediterranean Sea into its northern and southern territories. So Algeria was very much a part of France itself. And of course, as the largest country in Africa, Algeria also formed an important territory for France, which extended its colonial rule in different parts of North, West, and Central Africa. The French colonial rule came to an end in 1962 after 7 years of what was a rather violent war of decolonization. And you might be familiar with some of the histories of the war through films such as Guilo Pontecorvo's The Battle of Algiers from 1966. I think that is possibly the most famous film made about the war, as well as Youssef Chahín's Jamila the Algerian, made in Egypt in 1958. And attention to the conflict was also drawn by international artists, such as Pablo Picasso, who portrayed the Algerian anti-colonial fighter Jamila Bou Pasha in late 1961. And this actually brings me to the idea behind this exhibition, because women who, the many women who participated in the Algerian anti-colonial movement have been depicted and visually rendered as an image time and again. And they have become almost icons of decolonization in Algeria, which has also fueled their hypervisibility as image. And perhaps not surprisingly, the turning of women into icons of war and of the conflict very often drew attention away from their individual, collective, and also gendered experiences of decolonization. And this has led to the peculiar situation where women who fought for Algeria's independence are not entirely forgotten because they figure as these icons of conflict, but they are also not fully remembered because we know actually very few biographies of these women or know very little about their own experiences of conflict. And they continue, to hold this very tenuous place within narratives of the war. So this exhibition that I curated at apexart is really an attempt to explore how women's experiences from the war have been depicted and explored in contemporary art, and how artists have also critically and of course imaginatively engaged in with the existing representation that exists of women. So, I was so thrilled when Nadia Makhlouf, who I'm welcoming once again in our Zoom opening here, when she agreed to show her series of photographic diptychs in the exhibition. It is a series from 2014 and is titled in French De l'invisible au visible, Mujahida femme compétente, which can be translated into English as From the Invisible to the Visible, Mujahida the Woman Fighter. And so I begin the exhibition with 2 out of 16 diptychs that we show at apexart, and her series is actually much larger. It includes 30 diptychs overall. And the series was completed when Nadia traveled from France to Algeria, where she met some of the women who fought for Algeria's independence. And Nadia told me that she would meet each of the women a few times, not just once, and that they would speak about the women's experiences of the war and also after independence was achieved in 1962. And Nadia, who is of course significantly younger than these women, would also share aspects of her life from France. So there was this kind of conversation between them, which definitely helped to build trust between the artist and the women who would become the sitters and the protagonists of this photographic series. So each diptych consists of a pairing. On the right-hand side, you see the photographs that Nadia took during her trip in 2014, during the encounter with these women. And then on the left side, we have historical images that show these women during the war, so in the 1950s or early 1960s. And then each pairing is also accompanied by a biography of the women that Nadia wrote down as a result of her conversations with them. If we look at the diptych at the top, we see Henda, who was born 1927 in Algiers. She still lives there. And Henda joined a theater group that was led by members of the National Liberation Front, the FLN, which was the main anti-colonial faction in Algeria during the war. And the National Liberation Front organized these artistic and theater groups that performed internationally, for instance, in the Soviet Union, in China, in Iraq, and Egypt, so that they could raise awareness about the war in Algeria in front of international audiences as well, international publics. And so the historical image on the left shows her in this quite amazing, elaborate costume from one of the performances that usually would begin and end with the waving of the Algerian flag, a gesture that was banned by the French in Algeria during the war, of course, and with the singing of patriotic songs. And then on the right side, you have the contemporary portrait of Henda that was taken by Nadia in 2014. And these works, of course, continue in the exhibition space as well. And Lisa, if we could now move into the gallery, that would be great. And the whole series just reveals also the diversity of women's contributions to the anti-colonial struggle, both in the countryside and in Algeria's larger cities. And several diptychs show women who were active in the countryside as nurses, women who hid other fighters, who carried weapons or intercepted messages. And one diptych that I particularly like is of Zohra Slimi. And it shows, this is the one exactly, it shows Zohra Slimi, performing this very traditionally gendered task of sewing, but she's actually sewing Algerian flags so that they could be displayed publicly in a gesture that, as I said, was banned by the French. So I particularly, I think, like this diptych, but also want to draw your attention to another one, which is just at the top, and shows Alice Cherki, born in 1936 in Algiers, who is currently living in France. And Alice Cherki is an Algerian Jewish woman who also joined the struggle for independence because she opposed the racial segregation that was introduced with French colonialism. And she enrolled in medical school at the age of 18 and began treating the fighters of the National Liberation Front at a hospital that was run by the psychiatrist and philosopher Frantz Fanon. Some of you might be familiar with him. And the hospital was based in the eastern parts of Algeria. And her biography is really fascinating. She would move to France during the war to support the French branch of the National Liberation Front. That was also an important part of the struggle for independence. She would then go to East Germany to continue her training as a neuropsychiatrist, and then to Tunisia, where she actually cared for Algerian refugees who were displaced in Tunisia during the war. And there are, of course, so many more incredible stories that this series reveals. I think it's also important to stress that there are women who were French settlers, and they have decided to support the Algerian struggle for independence. So, if you have the time also after this tour, then I would invite you to look closely at these diptychs and also to engage, with the stories of women who came from such different socioeconomic, educational, linguistic, and geographical backgrounds. And I think it's also interesting to note the historical images as they were selected by the women in cooperation with Nadia. And I think that these choices, the kinds of historical image that these women selected also tells us volumes about how they themselves wanted to have their contributions remembered and presented publicly. So, if you have questions about the series, Nadia is also with us, so I don't want to be the only spokesperson for her work. You're also welcome to direct questions for her directly. And we will just now move to the opposite wall and to a work by the artist Marwa Arsanios, whose video and artist book we are presenting in this exhibition. And, it was important for me to place her works close to Nadia Makhlouf's series, because I think that the two works complement each other in very interesting ways. While Nadia's series seeks to give flesh and blood to women who continue to function as these disembodied symbols of decolonization, Marwa confronts this symbol actually head on in a video that is titled "Have You Ever Killed a Bear?" or Becoming Jamila from 2013-2014. So this work and Nadia Makhlouf's work were actually completed at a similar time. So the main protagonist, before we just watch the fragment, I want to give you a little more background information. The main protagonist of the video is a young actress, and she is asked to play the part of Jamila Bouhairet for an imaginary film. And Jamila Bouhairet is one of the most well-known women veterans in Algeria, known particularly for placing a bomb in a cafe that was frequented by French settlers and other Europeans during the Battle of Algiers in 1957. And she is one of the women who were famously portrayed in Guillaume Pontecorvo's The Battle of Algiers, as well as in Youssef Chahín's Jamila the Algerian, the two films that I mentioned earlier. And perhaps we can now show this fragment of Marwa's video, which also includes actually scenes from Pontecorvo's The Battle of Algiers. So we have Marwa's video that incorporates fragments of an existing film, but actually speaks in turn about an imaginary film. So Lisa, if we could play this fragment at this point.
أنت في مكان، صالة مليئة بأناس يتبادلون الأحاديث عن أي شيء وكل شيء. في حوزتك قنبلة يدوية الصنع، عليك بزرعها غير مكترثة بما قد يحصل أمامك. وإذا حدث وأن ساورتك فكرة أو تسللت إليك ذرة من شك، لا تحسبين أنه بإمكانك بعد أن تهربي. القنبلة موقوتة وستنفجر على أي حال. من الأفضل إذن أن تكتفي بوضعها بحسب المخطط. هذه كانت كلمات جميلة أخذت من سيناريو لفيلم سألعب دورها فيه. جميلة هي جميلة بوحيرد، المقاتلة الجزائرية من أجل الحرية. فيلم جديد مستوحى من مشاركتها في معركة الجزائر العاصمة ومن محاكمتها أيضاً. أسند إلي هذا الدور بعد أن رفضته الممثلة التي عُهد إليها في البداية، إذ قرأت السيناريو وسرعت في الإفصاح عن مشكلتها الأخلاقية معه.
ألا يمكنكم أن تروا أن جميلة هذا مجرمة لا أكثر؟
لقد رأت في جميلة مجرد مسخ لا يلائم صورتها البتة. هذا في حين أننا نحن الممثلات الأخريات في الكاستينج نتنافس على تأدية ما نعتبره دوراً بطولياً. كان لقائي بجميلة محض مصادفة. حينها كنت أبحث في مجلات قديمة كيف يمكن تحقيق الاشتراكية العربية.
That's great, thank you. So this is just the beginning of the video, and throughout the video, the main actress, who's the protagonist of the work, also is quite eager to play the part of Jamila Bouhairet, whom she considers an icon. And she is fascinated, even seduced by her image, which has been mediated time and again through cinema as well as through the popular press. And throughout the work, throughout the video, she makes quite cautious attempts to also resemble Jamila Bouhairet. For instance, by fixing her hair in front of a mirror or leaving a handbag under the counter in a cafe. That's the fragment that you also saw. And these moments in the video actually mirror scenes from Pontecorvo's The Battle of Algiers. But as the video unfolds, the actress grows quite hesitant about what it means to play the part of an iconic war veteran and whether her decision does not contribute to further compressing Jamila Bouhairet's subjectivity, her personal experiences, her agency into a disembodied image. And in an attempt to perhaps better understand this historical figure, she then enters into an imaginary dialogue with Jamila Bouhairet and even begins to speak as her. And in this fictive conversation, Bouhairet complains about the fact, for instance, that yet another film is being made about her and her participation in the war. And what is interesting is that she also speaks of the gendered experiences during the conflict. And at one point she states that we were not only fighting the French, but also each other. And I think this is a really powerful moment in the work because these recollections are fictive in Marwa Arsanios's video, but they do actually resonate with the recollections of women veterans who spoke of gender inequalities within Algerian anti-colonial ranks. And one of the veterans, called Fadela Mesli, for instance, recalled that during the war, Algerian women, as she said, led two revolutions, one against colonialism, the other against taboos. And so Marwa Arsanios's video speaks of the different taboos that surrounded women's participation in the war, and that shaped a very gendered and distinct experience of decolonization. And I just want to flag up that if you're interested in knowing more about the different power dynamics and structures that women in Algeria had to navigate during the conflict, then we have a very interesting talk by Natalia Vince from University of Portsmouth coming up on the 12th of June, moderated by Arthur Asaraf from University of Cambridge. And Natalia Vince has interviewed many of the women who participated in the Algerian War of Independence, and has also written a very interesting book about the topic. So in the exhibition at apexart, apart from Marwa's video, we also have her artist book on the right side, which is titled Words as Silence, Language as Rhymes. And of course, sadly, we cannot leaf through it now, but again, if you make it to apexart, then you can leaf through its pages. And the artist book reworks texts and images that were published in an Egyptian cultural magazine called Al Hilal, which in the 1950s and 1960s would particularly focus on Algerian women fighters and also on the figure of Jamila Bouhairet. And issues of the magazine also appear in the video, and we have included 3 different issues in the small vitrine that you can see here. And Al Hilal is still an existing magazine, which during the 1950s and 60s foregrounded the images of Algerian women fighters to show women as modern citizens actively participating in public life. And this was central to the state feminism that was advocated by Nasser, the then president of Egypt at the time. So Marwa's artist book also, and the video, they take us also beyond the context of Algeria, showing us how these images of Algerian women fighters have been mobilized to serve distinct political ideologies and purposes across the region. And perhaps we could now move to the large vitrine to see some of the other historical material. And as you will see, you know, the vitrine includes another Egyptian magazine called Al Musawer from 1958. On the right side, that's the green one, which again, somewhat predictably maybe, has an illustration of Jamila Buhairet on its cover page. And this just shows, you know, how popular her image has become. But it was also important for me to not only stress the role of these well-recognized women who came from urban spaces and were active in Algiers during the war, but also women who were active in the countryside. And to this end, I included a catalog that shows photographs of women who contributed to the war as nurses in the rural parts of the country. You see that in the middle. And on the left side, we have photographs of women who participated in the cultural branch of the National Liberation Front, performing, as I said, internationally. And here on the left side, you have images taken by the Algerian photographer Mohamed Kouassi in 1957 during the International Youth Festival in Moscow. So I hope you can also spend some time with these sources. And above the vitrine, we have a selection of historical images drawn from the audiovisual archives of the French Ministry of Armed Forces, which are located close to Paris. And they include photos taken during the arrest of another famous war veteran, Zohra Drif, one of the women portrayed again in Pontecorvo's The Battle of Algiers, who also wrote a memoir about her participation in the war. And the other images were taken during the independence celebrations in Algeria in 1962. So perhaps we can now move to a video work by Kader Attia, which is just to the left, and which is titled Colonial Melancholia from 2019, which in turn foregrounds oral recollections and women's everyday experiences during the war. And the video will be available to watch online for 2 weeks during the duration of the show. And it shows a conversation between the artist, Kader Attia, and his mother and another relative who is 102 years old. And in the video, Kader Attia's mother shares family stories family stories of women who collected jewelry during the war from neighbors and also from other villages to financially support the anti-colonial struggle. And these recollections, articulated in this intimate space of a family conversation, also reveal how the unrecognized, the often unrecognized ways in which women also supported the anti-colonial struggle. And the other relative then recalls how Algerian women integrated French colonial coins into their own jewelry designs as a sign of cultural reappropriation. And if you're familiar with the work of Kader Attia, these ideas of reappropriation and repair as sort of counter gestures to colonial dispossession are a theme that reappears time and again. And I think that, this video by Kader Attia also speaks to another work that we have in the show, which is Zineb Sedira's video retelling Histories My Mother Told Me from 2003. It is the oldest work in the exhibition, which equally foregrounds oral recollections and family memory transmission. So perhaps before I say more about the work, we could watch just a short fragment of it. Thank you, Lisa, for doing this.
يفيولي لها فام يعريوها يقولوا لها ما قاتلوا ديري لنا الماكلة خاطر جاو العسكر ثاني الجد كتير وخرجوهم مسكين برا وحنا نتقعدوا يهضرونا ويضحكوا قالوا لنا هاتوا ذبحوا لنا هاتوا لنا الدجاج هاتوا لنا ذيك وحنا ما نفهموا لهمش ولا العسكر جابوا الحرق يترجم قالت لهم ما والجاج مبيته في العشيش روحوا ديوهوك كلوا بنتين وخلت لك حدا وجدك راح قلت لهم اخذوا بنتي وها والجاج راه في العشيش تاع الجاج روحوا ديوهم وكل راحوا للجاج دوك بيتي غرنط الجاج ما عرف ديو ما عرف قتلوه ما عرف كيف يسوي كليو شو كليو.
Donc ils vous prennent du manger quoi, ce que vous aviez.
كلش واش عملوا يديروا.
Et des fois ils vous forcent à danser et à faire des choses comme ça les femmes, non?
Non, فرصة باش يديرونا كي هذاك هذا اللي واللي ما تباش تروح معاهم وتسير يقتلوها والله يصوتوها. الزروق هذا قلت لك عشيرنا في برسيم عنده فيرما وكيلو عنده البقري عنده الغلم عنده القمح عنده هو القمح يديروا في الديار ما يديروش في كما نقولوا جاوه المجاهدين تاع الشو عندوش منه باع جاو ليهم ما خلاوش قتلوا سيبو هو وسيبو في الدار قتلوا سيبو قتلوا هو وعندهم طفل بداو يقتلوه نرفنا مرتبوا ينحتوه قالتهم قتلوني انا ما تقتلوش الطفل صغير والغدوه صبحوا نقولوا في الرزق نتاعو في البقرات وصبحوا نقولوا في القمح وصبحوا نقولوا في الشيا وصبحوا هكا عاقدين علينا صايقهم العسكر ولا الحنابل في الكيميوات والمشكر تاع القمح ولا ريك ما خلاوش قد هكا صبحوا نسان ساكنين يطبوا خلاش تستا ولا
les enfants alors comment ils étaient quand ils voyaient tout ça les enfants ils devaient avoir peur qu'est-ce qu'ils faisaient
bien sûr les enfants عندهم سكن غير
ils tapaient les enfants aussi ils faisaient la misère aux enfants aussi
كاينين ولاد تصوتهم كاينين ولاد اللي ما يتحركوش ويخافوا منهم يقعدوا في بلاصه واحده كاينين ولاد اللي يقولوا ما تمسوش امنا ولا ما تمسوش بوينا ولا كيضربوا.
Et toi, quand tu te souviens de tout ça, comment ça te fait? Parce que en fait, tu as vécu en France, après tu as vécu avec...
I think we can stop here.
Alors, comment tu...
Thank you. So this video is quite emblematic of Sadira's practice, especially her early works, which often feature her mother as well as father, who talk about their experiences of the war. And in this case, Sadira's mother speaks of aspects of the war that have long been obscured both in Algeria and in France. Because as many historians have noted, now we know that rape and torture were actually widely practiced by the French military during the war, and women in the countryside were particularly vulnerable to these types of violence. France, of course, has taken a rather long time to recognize that these were its war tactics. But in Algeria, on the other hand, the topic of rape, for instance, has only rarely been articulated because it poses a sensitive topic. And for this reason, Sadira's engagement with these personal memories, which, it takes a long time for these memories to begin to form part of a broader collective imaginary of the war. This is why it has been quite so important. And I would now like to end our tour with Katia Kameli's prints and animation from a 2018 series called Soyez les bienvenus. And as you can begin to decipher, each work really forms this visual mosaics that is composed of historical images, photographs, as well as postcards. And across both prints and the animation, photographs of armed women fighters taken during the war sit side by side, picturesque views produced by the French under colonialism, as well as other images, for instance, of Algeria's second president, Houari Boumediene, who also fought during the war, as well as international revolutionaries who visited Algeria, such as Che Guevara, who stands there with Fidel Castro in the left-hand print. So the series, doesn't tell us any concrete histories of the war, and is actually quite reflective of Katia Kameli's practice that avoids sort of delivering these fixed narratives that pertain to Algeria's modern history. Instead, juxtaposing sources that create a whole field of possibilities in which one might begin to even start telling these histories. And importantly, by placing photographs of women who fought during the Algerian War of Independence next to those of well-known male revolutionaries, these works also open up the possibility of writing gendered histories of the war, which is the premise also of this entire exhibition. So I think I will end here so that we also have some time for the conversation. And I hope you will, feel engaged with the exhibition. There's, of course, the physical space, but I think apexart has also done a wonderful job in making the exhibition accessible online. So there's different possibilities for exploring the show as well at home.